It's gonna get a little warm in here, see that? We turned it outside breaking here.
Okay, we're just gonna jump right into it, and we appreciate you for coming back and doing this.
Oh, my pleasure.
So, where were you born?
I was born in Charleston, Charleston Area Medical Center, which wasn't there then, but it's the same hospital,
Gotcha. Remember what it was called back then?
Charleston Memorial Hospital.
Oh, gotcha. And did you grow up in the Charleston area, or where'd you grow up?
No, I grew up in the holler of Peachtree,
Peachtree. Where's that?
Naoma.
Okay,
It's a hollow up from Naoma.
gotcha. Gotcha.
Where
What-
Nancy Gerald grew up. She grew up on Drews Creek, which she grew up about 3 miles on up the holler from me.
Okay. Y'all reunited at the church here.
Yes.
Okay, what was it like growing up there?
Well, really, it was the greatest place in the world to grow up. We had about 3 acres land. If you've ever been to the Grandview Overlook and you kind of see the horseshoe with New River, where we lived, it was kind of a little horseshoe at Peachtree Creek, and we lived kind of in that horseshoe. The summer, we could, go and play in the creek. When I was small, we still had crawdads and minnows and things like that in the creek. So, we could always have fun in the creek.
And catch them.
We didn't have wild animals like we do today. You had squirrels and rabbits. So, BB guns would always be in the hillside, hunting with BB guns. We had rock cliffs. I don't know if any of the young people know Milton Webb, who comes here to church sometimes. He was my neighbor. He was my earliest childhood friend, still good friends today. We'd rock climb together. Trees, we had a lot of tree climbing. We had a lot of buildings on our property, so, we always, back then, played cowboys and Indians and so, or Batman and Robin, and was always climbing on the roofs and jumping off things that I can't even think of today, but.
Didn't have too many broken bones, did you?
Oh, no.
Okay. So you've mentioned a few of your hobbies and activities. What was your favorite sport or hobby?
Well, growing up, my favorite sport was basketball. We had what's called a cellar. It's a place where you can your garden produce and you put it in the cellar, and it would keep it from freezing during the winter and keep it cool during the summer. We had a building over top of the cellar, and so, we got us a hoop and nailed it on the side of the building, and so I wore out the grass with playing basketball under the hoop, and Wilt Chamberlain had nothing on me, Bill Russell. I beat them all, like most kids.
How about pets? Do you have any pets?
No, I don't have any pets. Patty has a pet. It's a dog.
Gotcha. It's not a pet?
It's our pet.
Oh.
Wait, Liz is going.
I'm guessing she takes care of it.
She does, and don't let anybody convince you that animals cannot understand or that they cannot talk. Because her and the dog, they carry on conversations all the time. And they understand each other, because he'll do what she tells it to do, and she'll do what he tells her to do.
He listens.
So, how old were you when you got saved?
I was 11 years old. We went to church about a half a mile down the holler from where we lived. My parents were both in church when they were married, so I was always taken to church. we grew up in a little church called the Naoma Free Will Baptist Church. My dad was most of the time that I remember, he was the choir leader. So he sat on the front row, and I would sit there with him. And usually, like some of these folks, when the preaching started, I go to sleep. And one night, our pastor, Gerald Holly, he was preaching on hell. I didn't pay much attention to him while I was in church. But I went home that night, and a funny thing happened. His whole message, it just kept playing like I had a recorder in my head, and I kept hearing his message over and over. And, you know, the thing that kept resonating with me is if I died without accepting Jesus as my Savior, I was going to go to hell. And hell was a place where you burned forever and ever and ever without any end. And when I tried to go to sleep that night, I didn't just hear the words, but I could see myself descending into the flames. And man, you're talking about getting your attention. So I began to pray, and I prayed, and I prayed. Really didn't know how to pray, really. Didn't know I'd been in church and I'd heard people pray all the time. But instead of praying, maybe I should say I was begging. I was begging God to not let me go to that place, and asking Him to forgive me of my sins. And if He would just save me, I'd live for Him all my life. And finally, I felt a peace come over me. And I went to sleep, and I slept better that night than I had slept in a long time, because I think God had been dealing with me, my heart, for some time. But that message kind of brought me to a decision point. And that's a decision I'm glad I made. It's a decision I've never regretted, although there's been times when I've not lived like I should have lived, and I've had to go back and ask God to forgive me. And I've rededicated my life,
Right.
When we moved from Naoma to Beckley and we started attending Bradley here as a teenager, I rededicated my life here as a teenager. And although I was baptized by the pastor at Naoma, Brother Legg was having a baptismal service down at New River at Terry, and I was baptized with probably about 14 other teenagers from our youth group at that time. Again, never regretted those decisions. Things I have regretted is not being a little more serious maybe from time to time, especially when I was young, not being serious enough, but never regretted making that decision.
Gotcha. Well, you kind of hit on our next couple questions, but I'm going to point them out a little bit. So you said you got saved at home rather than at church.
Yes.
Okay, so I think that's something that's good for our youth to know, that, it doesn't have to be in a church setting. They can talk to God wherever they are. And you also mentioned that you slept better that night than you had in a long time. Could you elaborate a little more on the feeling you got after being saved?
It was peace. It was a feeling of peace. Before I was saved, I had a fear. I had a fear of dying. I had a fear of going to hell. I had a fear of not waking up the next morning. I had a fear of impending doom and disaster, if that makes any sense. But after I'd asked God to forgive me and committed my life, I think that's something that's missing a lot today. We ask God to forgive us and we invite Him into our heart. But the one thing that we probably should emphasize more than we do is that we make a commitment to Christ. I committed my life to Him. And I said, Lord, if you'll forgive me, I'll live for you the rest of my life. And maybe part of it was panic, maybe part of it was fear. But still yet, I made that commitment. And after that, I I no longer had fear, you know, that was taken away. Where I had fear, I now had peace. I had impending doom or something bad was about to happen to me. My life was filled with joy. Not an overwhelming laughter type of joy, but just something in my heart that just made me feel good. You know, it's underlying. And it's there today, even when you're going through troubles and trials, there's still a joy in your heart. You may not have a smile on your face, but there's a joy inside. This joy has been there through most of my life. And the confidence, you know, where before I was saved, I really didn't have a whole lot of self-confidence. And I don't like to use the word self-confidence because my confidence is not in myself. It is in knowing that Christ is with me. And Paul said in Philippians 4:13, I can do. You know, I like the can do. I can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me. When I was in grade school, I used to have teachers, and when you say, I can't do anything, and they'd always say, can't never could do anything. You'll never do anything, it's can't. You can do, which they were re-emphasizing what really the Bible has already taught us through Christ.
Right.
And myself, no, I can't do a lot of stuff, except get in trouble.
We're all good at
But
that.
through Christ, yes, through Christ, I can do all things. And it gave me confidence to go through school. It gave me assurance. I thought today, most of the kids started back to school. Some of them started in high school, some started in middle school, some maybe started grade school or kindergarten. When you do that, it's a scary thing to enter a new school. You know, even though you know some of the kids, you're gonna meet kids, you're gonna have new teachers, kids you didn't know. So it's kind of a scary thing. But one of the things that always helped me through those transitional points in life was knowing that God was with me. Wasn't going in there by myself. God was with me.
Right.
And I had that confidence to know that He was with me. He surrounded me. Today, we hear a lot about bullying and those things. Sometimes we're our own worst enemies, and we get ourselves in trouble. But if you go and you kind of just not promoting yourself, you know, just kind of doing what you're supposed to do, kind of watching what you say, I found that God was always there protecting me. And He helped me a lot of times, I know. Because sometimes I wonder, how did that happen? Or, wow, man, I'm glad I got by that, you know. And you wonder why or how. And today, especially, I can look back and say, yeah, God was there. God was there. He helped me. I had an uncle who was a pastor in Mansfield, Ohio. And we would talk a lot of times after I became a minister. And we'd talk about those types of things and how that God kept me out of trouble. And, you know, and he'd just smile. And I realized, yeah, okay, I got what he's saying, you know. God had His hand on me. Not because I was anything special, but because I had accepted Him and I was one of His children.
Right.
And that made me special. Not that I'm any more special than any other child, but because I am His child, I'm special. And so is every one of these children. When they accept Jesus in their heart, they're special. They're special to God. And God will keep His hand on them if they would just trust Him and walk with Him.
Gotcha. Now, you said you got saved when you were 11 and rededicated your life later. Was there a different mindset when you rededicated your life? 'Cause you said when you were 11 it was kind of a fear or a sense of impending doom. Was there something else motivating it when you rededicated?
Yes. When I was in high school, was always in church, I hung around with church kids. We did the things that church kids do. Well, I had other friends that, man, they were doing everything in the world, you know. Not nearly what everything means today, but
Right.
then, you know, there was still alcohol, there was still some, drugs were just kind of getting started. But all the temptations that face children were still there. And I thought, and I would just see them having fun, and sometimes, you know, you're a child, so you're seeing things through different eyes. And I had this thought once, and I said, man, Lord, you know, why am I doing all this? Why don't I just give up this and go out and have a good time, and then I'll come back and get saved a little later? And we had a church that we had really good church services. It seemed like every church service you went to, people were shouting, they were praising the Lord, they would walk the aisles, you know, and you could just feel something running all over you, you know. But when I made that statement, it's like everybody around could experience that joy of Christ, and there I sat. I couldn't feel anything. I would pray, and my prayers weren't going anywhere, you know, it's just like talking to myself. And after a while, I began to get a little worried. I thought, man, I blasphemed against God. You know, God's not going to hear me. I'm doomed, you know. So again, it was a fear. There was still a part of it. I had a fear that, I had committed an unpardonable sin, and man, I was doomed. After a while, one Sunday night, right here, Brother Daniel was preaching, and I said, Lord, I don't care. I'm going to the altar. So I went to the altar and I began to pray, and I said, God, forgive me. Forgive me for ever saying that. Forgive me for ever thinking that. Lord, if you'll just forgive me, I'll never say anything like that again, and I'll do what you want me to do the rest of my life. And you know, an amazing thing happened. All of a sudden, joy overwhelmed my spirit again. Peace was back. And I said, thank you, Lord. And from that point on, even times when I've got tempted, I thought of that moment. I said, I don't want that. I don't want to go there anymore. I just want to be able to be where I can sense God's presence and His power. It's not like I feel Him with me all the time, because we walk by faith, you know, not by feeling. But it is good to know that from time to time, I do get that feeling. I get that joy. I get that peace. It just overwhelms me and lets me know, man, God is good. He's good all the time. You know, you hear me say that every Sunday morning, but it's true.
Absolutely. So, since you've been saved, now we know the obvious one, you're the pastor of the church here, but what other ways have you been able to serve people?
Now or when I was younger?
Throughout your life, since you've been saved?
Well, I had a dad that believed in work, okay? He had to get up before daylight and go to work, and he usually got home after dark, except in the summers. But in the summers, when he would get home about 7 o'clock or so in the evening, he would work in the garden until dark. So my dad believed in work, and he told me I always had chores. When I was probably about 8 years old, I began to, we had about 3 acres. About 1.5 acres of that was grass. The other 1.5 acres was garden stuff, okay? So he gave me the chore of mowing the grass with push mower, okay? And we had a hillside, so you walk. And, you know, part of my chores was to help with the garden. I had to help Dad. My dad had about 1/2 acre of a garden, and my grandfather had about 1 acre. Of course, part of that was a hillside full of strawberries. We had a strawberry field. And, man, my grandfather, we worked all the time. I mean, it was always hoeing corn, potatoes, whatever we had. It was, when you're small, those rows seemed like they would never end. But it was good times, you know. My grandfather, we always cut firewood. We didn't have chainsaws, we had a crosscut saw. He'd put me on the other end of the crosscut. I don't think I ever helped him because he would lift me a plumb off the ground pulling that saw, you know, and he'd fuss at me, said, "Don't get it in a pinch, don't push on it, just guide it," you know. But it was, you know, it was still fun, because I was spending time with my grandfather, and, you know, what was the question again?
What are some ways you've been able to serve since you've been saved?
Well, I started talking about my dad giving us jobs to do, and of course, when we moved from there, we moved to Whitesville, to Gerald's Valley, and we had some elderly ladies that lived around us where we rented. So Dad said, "Son, see those ladies? He said, that's your job to go cut their grass." So every week, I was out mowing their grass. We didn't have weed eaters. We had old clippers, and every one of them had fences. So I had to trim around their house, the sidewalks, the fence with those clippers. And I don't know, I wore out 2 or 3 pairs of clippers, clipping them, you know, when I was probably about 12 years old, you know. So that was my job in the neighborhood. And Dad said, if they offer you pay, don't take it. That's your job. You're to help them out. And I did. And of course, they were dear ladies. A couple of those ladies were friends of mine until I was in my 20s and 30s. They lived to be over 100 years old. And 2 precious saints of God. And everybody on Cold River loved them, you know. They were special. But, you know, we always had to help people in the neighborhood out, you know, who needed help. Of course, over the years, you know, people just needed food. You know, we've always provided food, given to help. Try to give secretly, you know. You're not supposed to do your alms before people, you know. You get your reward then. So I'd rather have God's blessings. So I'd rather help people secretly. And of course, being in ministry, you know, hospital work, visitation, nursing homes, hospitals, a lot, that's been a big part of our ministry, as well as visiting unsaved people in your church.
So what would your hope be for our young people here?
I have great hopes for these young people. The best thing that can ever happen to them is to be fully committed to Christ at a young age. There is a principle that you find that God gave us in the world, but it applies to us in our spiritual lives as well. You know, I talked about us having gardens. So you learn how to plant beans and how to plant corn. But when you planted those seeds in the ground and you fertilized them and you watered them, they're going to spring up and they're going to bring forth beans, they're going to bring forth corn, and whatever you plant, you're going to reap. It's true in life, spiritually speaking, in other ways. How we live our lives when we're young will have a big impact on how the end of our life is going to be. Life just gets better, you know, as you get older, when you've committed your life to the Lord when you're young. I've lived for the Lord all these years, and I can see things now that I never could understand when I was their age. When I was their age, I lived a certain way because the Bible said to live a certain way, and you had to live it by faith. You just did it because you read the Bible, this is the way you do. This is the way you live. And you had faith that things would turn out okay. Now I'm older. I'm reaping things that I sowed when I was younger. Most of it's good. Okay? It's not that I was always an angel or anything like that. But, you know, today, you know, I'm reaping the fact that we've been in church, we've raised our kids in church. Patty and I met in church, we got married in church. I was pastoring before we were married. So she knew what she was getting when we got married. So she can't blame me, you know, for changing anything. But our children have been saved. I've been blessed to baptize both of them. Strange as it was, they both were saved after I had been out of the state preaching revivals. And when we came home that night, one of them, you know, it was different years, but they got saved after we got back. Been blessed to baptize them, been blessed to marry them. They're in church, they're bringing their children up in church. That's the greatest blessing of all. And God has made a way for us. Even when God called me into a full-time Christian service, I wondered, how in the world are you going to make it? But God has made a way, you know. It's been almost 20 years now since we went into full-time Christian service. And God's blessed us to pay our bills and to enjoy life. And it really has been busy. It's a busy life, but you enjoy it. Because I get to be with people like you, you know, that makes life enjoyable. Great people. So my desire for these kids is that they would fully commit themselves to following Christ so that down through their life, they get the best that life has to offer. It's not always going to be what the world tells you is the best, because the world is always trying to sell us a bag of goods. But the Bible is truth, and it gives us the truth of life and of death, and good times and bad. It still gives us the truth. The thing about the Bible, when people did bad things in the Bible, it don't whitewash them, it don't cover it up, it just tells you like it is. So you know what truth is. But if we'll follow the Lord with all of our heart, you'll find that life will somehow reward you down through life with the best that there is in this life.
Good deal. Well, Pastor, we appreciate it. A lot of good information tonight. And it's good getting to know a little bit about your upbringing.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.